Hello everyone. I'm glad to see you on my channel. The story I'm going to tell you today is pure. It is true that all the bad things that happen in life happen for a reason. It is said that we can appreciate the good things, the things when they happen to us. I hope you enjoy this story. I wish you a pleasant viewing experience.
The weather had been sunny since early morning, so May decided to hit the road early, even though it had rained for 3 days in a row, but she still decided to set off on the long journey. The cat was in the way, tangling between her legs. To tame him, she had to use the harshest measures on her pet. Go for a walk. I don't have time for you right now. And don't make me angry. But entreaties did not work on the furry companion. Then May took the cat by the scruff of the neck and led him outside. If you don't understand, I'll have to remind you of your place. It will be better if you catch mice instead of just waiting and sleeping. The cat flicked his tail unhappily and started on his breakfast. Are you going to threaten me again? Insolent creature. May pretended to pounce on the cat, and it slowly retreated into the backyard. She treasured her pet very much, but sometimes she had to bring him to his senses. She knew very well that the cat would sulk for 2 days and then get hungry and come home. But his impertinent behavior sometimes made her mad. She could at least put some clothes on. He always gets in my way, that beast. May put on her boots just in case, for she had to walk through the woods, which could be treacherous after a rainstorm without a companion. She had barely reached the end of the village when Lily, who had come from nowhere, came out to meet her. They had once been friends, inseparable. But then a black cat had come between them. The women didn't feed openly, but Lily was always trying to provoke the good-natured May. This morning she found a pin and used it. Where are you going, May? Do you care? Of course I do. I see you're going into the woods where the wild beasts are, leaving your jokes for later. I haven't time to chat with you about meat. Don't take offense. I know perfectly well you're going to Joe's, but you're wasting your time. He's a recluse. He's staying with the Starks. It's a most thankless task, Lily. I was asked by a man to help out around the house a little, and I agreed. Whether he's a Joe or a great social activist is none of my business. Why are you so upset? I must have hit a sore spot. What if you could be a suitable match? You're a widow and he lives as a recluse. A perfect match. Only one. To eat. What a cheapskate your Joe is. What's he saving for? Who is he raising money for? May answered nothing and walked silently past Lily, who said with a chuckle, Oh. And you fool, believe it. I know why you're going. You want to get a man, but you won't succeed because you're no longer a desirable commodity. You've got your eye on Joe, but Kira's younger and prettier than you. The mood was ruined. May marveled at the ability of some people to poison the lives of others. Lily in the village gossip, excelled at it. No one dared call her names behind her back or hum different tunes to her. Quarrel, that was her middle name. Even the children called her that. But her contemptuous attitude. If something bothered her, she tried to take out her anger on her opponent. May had to defend herself against her neighbor more often than the other villagers. Lily lived 2 houses away from her. Since both houses had long been abandoned, she was the closest to her. It was about 5 kilometers in a straight line to the village where May was headed. She had grown up on this land, so she wasn't afraid of the forest. Every hill, every bush was familiar from her childhood, and she could navigate these dense thickets with her eyes closed. She remembered Joe from her youth, but he was 6 years older than her and had left the area after high school. When he returned, she hardly recognized the tall, handsome son of a forester. By that time, there was no one left in the village except a few ancient old men, and those had soon passed away. All sorts of people talked about Joe, but May didn't care about him. She had enough to worry about. She had children to raise, sick parents to care for. But the years flew by, the children went their separate ways, and she was left alone with her husband. 3 years ago, she became a widow. About that time, Joe showed up at her door. He approached the woman without any preamble. May, would you mind helping me around the house a little? It's hard to do it alone. The woman looked a little taken aback, but didn't show it. If it's in my power, of course I'll help. The guest was delighted. I knew you wouldn't say no. You and your husband and I were best friends when we were young. We worked on the same combine one summer. It was a good time. Too bad I found out about it too late. May's eyes glittered suspiciously, and the guest realized his mistake. I'm sorry, May, for reminding you. That's all right, Joe. My pain will stay with me forever, and I know about your friendship. Sam used to mention you a lot. He wanted to come visit you, but it didn't work out. There was an awkward pause. May didn't understand what had happened in this man's life that he still cared so deeply. And unnecessary questions could only reopen old wounds, so she decided to steer the conversation in a neutral direction. Tell me, Joe, what kind of help do you need? The guest immediately perked up, as if he'd been waiting for that question. Nothing in particular, just housework, cleaning, and I wouldn't mind if you cooked something to eat. I have a farm and a beehive that I inherited from my father, and I have to keep an eye on them out of the woods. I'm critically short on time. May wasn't surprised. And you're not retired yet? The man laughed heartily. Do I look like an old man? I'm still young. The office is even glad because the younger generation doesn't really want to do this kind of work. May fussed at the stove. I'm going to feed you now. You can try these dishes. And maybe I'm not good enough to help you. The man clutched his hat in his hands in embarrassment. He wanted to bow, but the hostess still sat him down at the table because he was devouring the borscht with such an appetite. She realized that this man was not spoiled by the comforts of home. Thanking the hostess for the treat, the forester hurried to his hut. That's what he jokingly called his dwelling. 2 days later, May paid a return visit. At first, she could not believe that a man could live in such conditions. The hut looked more like a den than anything else. The windows did not let in daylight and were covered with dust and soot. The whole house gave off a feeling of abandonment. The woman couldn't help herself. Joe, is it possible to live like this? The man looked confused again. Probably not, no. But I've gotten used to it in 20 years. And frankly, I don't have time for myself. The farm and the bees need tending. Besides, I have to keep up with what's going on outside the forest. I barely have time. May wasn't surprised. Why do you need so much all by yourself? He looked at his assistant confusedly. I don't know myself. It's become a habit. When I returned to my hometown, my parents were alive, and there was still some life in the village. Literally, in a few years, everything was abandoned, but I continued to live in the same rhythm, as if hoping that everything would go back to normal. I know the feeling. Sometimes I wish I could go back in time too. It seems that if I close my eyes, I'll find myself back in a time when happiness seemed to be everywhere. Joe's eyes glittered strangely. He quickly looked away and changed his tone. He asked, May, perhaps you could fetch some water. I'll run over quickly right away. There's a river nearby and I take water from the springs to drink. May cleaned up Joe's house. Although he had a modest supply of food, she made him some soup. You should get a refrigerator, Joe. How can you live without one? I can't even imagine. I'm used to the Spartacus way of life. I had an old machine, but it broke down. Well, I'll think about buying a new one. Thanks for your help. The man took out his worn wallet, but Mai was indignant. Don't you dare. I didn't come here to help you for money. May, I can't do that. All labor must be paid for. Then at least take the honey. I have a special one. There's no chemicals in here. Joe pulled a jar of amber contents from the table. Thank you. My Sam used to get honey from your father, but then he stopped. He was very sick. Lately, he even had trouble getting around the house. Who would have thought it would happen like this? It's like living in the middle of nowhere. Not even cell phone service. They're even threatening to cut the power. You know, they don't want me to live here alone. Where am I supposed to go? May sighed heavily. Last year, a whole crowd came to our house too. We told them about the bad roads, but they demanded that we leave. Not so long ago, other people were saying the exact opposite. Then they closed the medical center, the post office. It's good that there's still a store. Otherwise, we'd have to walk 10 kilometers for bread. The forester slapped his forehead in surprise. What a fool I am, forgetful. May, you have a long way to go. Take my bicycle. I use two-wheel transportation when I need to go to the market. Don't you? I have two. I bought them right away in case I need to replace them. No, I prefer to walk. It's safer. You can run into any kind of trouble in the woods. Don't worry. I have a means of transportation too, but I rarely use it. From that day on, May visited her ward twice a week, and he always did her errands. Soon the forester's house had a new refrigerator and colored curtains on the windows. A strong friendship developed between the elderly people. However, the woman increasingly caught herself thinking that she wanted something more than just confidential conversations. With May's arrival, the reclusive woodsman's life became a little brighter. The woman came to him on Tuesdays and Fridays, and he looked forward to her arrival. She did everything quietly and soulfully, and the man felt that she radiated positive energy. Over the many years he had spent in seclusion, he had really longed for that simple warmth and human companionship. Though every week the man went to the market with his natural products in the area of these forays into the civilized world, obviously something was missing. Perhaps it was because of mental longing that he asked the wife of his youthful friend to help him. The excuse of lack of time was simply a valid excuse. Lately, the forester had developed another strange habit. Once or twice a week, he and his faithful dog would make a detour through the village. They would stroll slowly down the only street, watching life with black-eyed, empty windows without a look of fear. And Tommy tried to soothe him with stories of his former life in the village. "You see, dog, the wind always blew here." "No, my friend. Once upon a time, life in the village was boiling. There were more young people than old people. In the evenings, there were so many couples walking along the river that it was impossible to squeeze through. Look, they lived in this house. The wife and her grandfather wove sturdy baskets, but the old man was very angry. And in this house lived the moonshiner. The women didn't like her. And one day, all the women together made a mess to keep the men from getting drunk. Looked at his master quite human eyes, and Sam told him more and more details from his past life. When he was a boy, the main authority for little Joe was his grandfather. He was named after the oldest of the Stark family, and he was very proud of that. When he grew up a little, he learned that his grandfather during the war was a partisan, and this made a strong impression on the boy. He began to follow Tony literally everywhere. This caused lively discussions in the village. We took another look at our Joe and off we went. One Joe grabbed an axe and the other grabbed a bucket. Of course, the folk songs of the village were not noted for their elegance, and no one could explain what a bucket and an axe had in common. But the rhyming verses were a delight to everyone. They teased the younger Joe, and he felt a righteous anger in his heart. Tony only chuckled into his snub-nosed mustache. As was his habit, he rolled a cigarette out of a newspaper and stuffed it with tobacco. "Don't take after me, Joe. I can't quit now. I didn't smoke before the war because I was a Komsomol member. And when the enemy came to our land, we ran straight to the recruiting office with the boys. But we were too young. We wanted to run to the front in the first days, but we didn't have time. How those damned enemies attacked." Little Joe listened to his grandfather's stories with his mouth open, and you became a partisan. You were immediately accepted, welcomed. But where else would they go? If it weren't for the partisans, they'd all be sent to the other side. So old men went in with children, young people sought salvation in the forest. The Germans were very afraid of the partisans and were afraid to go into the forest. And you, grandfather, were given a gun too. "Oh, grandson, I quickly mastered this skill, and I learned many other useful things." The boy's imagination began to paint pictures of the exploits of a young partisan. "You found yourself in the enemy's lair?" Grandfather gently ruffled the unruly hair of his grandson. "I've seen many such movies. They're all the heroes are fearless. And in reality, war is a very scary thing. But strangely enough, in the partisans we learned various useful things, for example, weaving baskets, drying furniture with combs." The boy wondered why they should be dried. "You, grandson, as a schoolboy, should know how many vitamins are in one comb. The women made a kind of compote out of them. Although the taste was disgusting, everyone in the squad had to drink it, and then we were treated to honey. It was a real celebration of life." Tony Sr. told an amazing story about how during one of the raids they found real beehives. Apparently, the invaders bypassed this abandoned farm, and the owners in fear for their lives also left the house, but the bees remained. When we saw these hives, we could not believe it at first. The bees were going about their business as if nothing had happened. Of course, it was an almost impossible task to transport the huts with honey to the unit, but my comrades and I managed. We got real hard-working bees. There was so much honey that we had to fill all the jars and even buckets, but the sweet life didn't last long. Did the bees fly away? No, grandson. The Germans discovered our unit, or maybe someone betrayed us, but we had to fight. Many comrades died covering the retreat of the unit. That's how it turned out. And after the war, I decided to take up beekeeping. First, I built this house, and then I married your grandmother." Looking around his property, Joe Sr. often marveled at how several generations of Starks could fit into this small living space. The orphanage had been built many decades ago. Today it looked like a fortress. The oak boards rang when the owner hammered a nail into the wall, and when Tony was a boy, the sturdy structure had seemed like a palace, and everyone in the village envied it, and in the family. What kind of songs did you write, Tony? I wonder for what merits the collective farm awarded him such a large plot and permission to cut oak trees. Fair voices answered the envious, while some wandered behind the lines. But at the age of 17, he had already fought the Nazis. He deserved it, man. There's nothing to discuss. The old man had 3 sons, and they all lived in the same house with their families. Later there were additions. The bathhouse expanded, and the village itself. Joe planned to connect his future life with the village. His grandfather also hoped for this, but the boy's parents, especially his mother, dreamed of a different future. For their youngest son, "You need to settle down in the city. When you go to college, son, you'll have a good diploma. You'll be a respectable man, you'll live in an apartment with amenities, and you can always go back to the village." Grandpa Joe didn't like that kind of talk. Why are you leading the boy astray? Let him decide for himself what he wants to be. You have to serve in the army and then go to college. But right after school, the boy had to forget about enrollment because in their village, there was an accident at the nuclear power plant. Only a small part of the radioactive cloud touched the village, but the residents hurried to leave their homes. Joe's parents also began to pack up, but the old grandfather said, "I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to die here." A few months passed and Tony died quietly in his sleep. After the funeral, Joe's parents moved to the neighboring district to their eldest son and stayed there, and Joe was drafted into the army in the spring. To his surprise, in the unit he met his friend Sam. His school friend had already served 6 months, so he did not offend Joe. At that time, hazing was common, and all new recruits dreaded the first few months of service. Before leaving home, Sam asked Joe, "Will you come back after the service?" "Sam, where will I go back to? The village is empty." "We are very much needed in the village now. There are not enough laborers." "I want to go to college. I'll become an engineer in a factory." Education is good, but something tells me that engineers will soon be out of work, but drivers will always be needed. I'll come back with my family and live in peace. How wonderful. You've got your whole life planned out in advance, but you have to have a purpose. The friends didn't realize they'd be parting for years, but soon Sam's predictions about his career choice came true. In order not to burden his parents, Joe worked part-time during his studies. Metropolitan life required large expenses, and the scholarship was enough only for a few trips to the student cafe. Had to find money and decent clothes. A guy without real branded jeans could not count on the attention of girls. Therefore, at night, Joe unloaded railcars, and on weekends worked at the vegetable base. And although for such a low-prestige job paid a mere cents, the young man managed to make ends meet on food and fancy clothes. Classmates openly envied him and sometimes asked for clothes and money. And to go on a date without pants, it's as luck would have it. The guy often helped his comrades until one day he lost his holiday outfit. One of the tenants came back to him with a set of rags. "I'm sorry, Joe. Believe me, I didn't see that coming." Imagine, I went to see a girl off and she didn't tell me that her dad, and he's some kind of army chief. It's like a modern-day threesome from a classic of ours. But I did not know of the existence of these little beasts and walked carelessly all the way to the manor. My bogeyman waved me off with a wave of her hand, and I walked back, but not so fast. Imagine, Joe, about 8 menacing dogs, and all of them chasing me. I decided to run, but they can run 100 meters pretty good. The unfortunate cavalier showed Tony his bites on his arms and legs, smeared with green paint. Now I'm going to get about 40 shots, maybe more. Don't worry, I'll fully compensate you for the damage. Joe didn't go into the details of the dog bite measures, and he was well aware that a loser like him didn't have the money to cover the damages. But after this incident, he never lent his belongings to anyone else. The young man had to continue working at night to make up for the financial losses. The guys openly laughed at him. "Boy, why are you so greedy for work?" Joe didn't suspect a trick from his coworkers. To make a long story short, I told a story about dogs. Finally, I added that today you can only buy something decent from Goodsey, and they charge such high prices. The guys laughed heartily. One Conrad, whom everyone called Santa Claus for his constantly red nose, said that normal people make money on water. It's the most valuable commodity now. This snob feels sorry for us for the tattered USA. As for me, one is enough for me. Women love me even in this outfit. The rest of the crew also enjoyed bantering with the student, and he tolerated their jokes. Joe didn't settle in the capital to waste time. He was strictly focused on his goal. And although girls openly flirted with him, he, like any man, wanted to meet the one he dreamed of. But where to look for her? He didn't know. It is known that fate itself finds those who are on her list for change. Joe waited a long time for her to show interest in him. But time passed, and there was no change. Late one night, he was in a hurry to get home from work to catch the last bus. Usually they ended in the morning, but on this day there were many people who wanted to make some extra money, and 2 cars were unloaded in a few hours. The stop was well lit, and the young man noticed some movement from afar. Then a woman's voice sounded. "Leave me alone, or I'll call the police." A man's voice mockingly replied, "The police? Where are the police?" And Joe happened to be in sight. "Did you call for help?" The question was addressed to a girl who held a lady's purse instead of a shield and held an umbrella in her other hand. She nodded affirmatively. "Quite right, but never mind. If he twitches, I'll poke him in the eye." The plucky Amazon demonstrated the sharpness of her umbrella. "My daddy sharpened it on purpose so I could defend myself." The guy, who smelled of fresh alcohol, gesticulated vigorously with his hands. "She's crazy." "Absolutely. I didn't say anything like that. She's threatening me." "You're going to be a witness, kid. That lady threatened me." Joe tried to smooth things over. "So he just happened to be there. And drunk too." Any normal girl would have been against that kind of introduction. "I'm sure if I hadn't gotten there in time, you wouldn't have gotten rid of him." The bus had already pulled up. The guy jumped on the step. "Yeah, but forget about her." I approached her with the best of intentions. He didn't hold out like a cavalier, made his way to the very back of the bus, and there he expressed his indignation loudly for a long time. But during the whole ride he glanced occasionally at Joe, who was guarding the stranger. After a few stops, continuing to berate the entire female sex, the guy jumped off the bus. "Bye?" The girl laughed. "There are those types. I'm always scared when I work second shift. I work as a paramedic in a factory." I didn't even know such a position existed in the staff of such factories. Alas, there are dangerous industries. Sometimes accidents happen. Drivers have to be sent to the line, and some irresponsible comrades come to work smelling of alcohol. "You have a difficult job." Suddenly the girl asked, "Are you walking me out?" In doing so, she used the affirmative form rather than a question. Joe looked at the stranger with undisguised surprise. The girl's eyes sparkled mischievously, and there was no hint of embarrassment on her face. "Aren't you afraid that I, like your former comrade, will start hitting on you?" "No, you're not. And I noticed that right away. I didn't know you could read faces." "My name is Jill. Let's use the informal form of address. And that you always gives me the hiccups literally 5 minutes later." Tony had to marvel a second time at this girl's boldness. "I agree, Jill. I'm Joe." The young man held out his right hand to the girl, but at that moment the bus skidded on a curve, and he didn't keep his balance. Jill laughed heartily and awkwardly at what kind of guys they were and immediately reached out to him. "Hold on. Why are you being so reckless? Hold on to the rail." Joe straightened up. "Are we back to you again?" This went on for 2 whole hours, but the young men didn't notice how the time flew by. They competed in wit and laughed heartily at their own jokes. Jill was the first to realize it. "Oh, I'm so selfish. All I think about is myself. You probably have to work tomorrow morning." Joe mechanically replied, "No, I work at the Institute morning and evening." Only now he remembered that he wasn't wearing branded jeans and a jacket with labels, but ordinary pants, and was surprised for the 3rd time. That evening he realized that clothes play a secondary role in a person's life. First of all, people evaluate his mind and behavior, although this truth has long been established, but it's nice when you come to this conclusion on your own. Of course, Joe had girls before, but all these were fleeting romances, which always ended according to the movie. More often than not, the young man himself fell behind another girlfriend, and only once a hysterical woman threw a fit of jealousy when he complimented her friend. After that scandalous incident, the guy tried to be friends at a distance. In the relationship, he was limited to light flirting, which, by the way, like many girls. But Jill was completely different. This girl never ceased to surprise him. Every day she gave him new surprises. One day he couldn't resist. You know, I used to not understand the meaning of the cliche that every woman is an unread book. The girl squinted her eyes. But now you do? Yes, this comparison suits you very well, and I am ready to read this book page by page. Aren't you afraid that one day this book will bore you? And I'm sure that won't happen. Everyone in my family is a one-lover. My grandfather, my father, and my 2 brothers. That's great. Turns out, constancy is a hereditary trait in your family. But I'm going to have to surprise you again. Joe grabbed his head playfully. Jill, please don't tell me that everyone in your family is also a one-woman man. Pretty much so. My grandparents lived together for over 50 years and even died on the same day. The girl's voice became sad. The young man became wary. Jill, maybe we shouldn't talk about this. No, I want you to know. It happened in the winter. 2 years ago. My grandfather, despite his advanced age, loved to travel in his car. He even changed several cars, and his last car was a foreign car. Was your grandfather a professor by any chance? You guessed it. My grandmother is also a scientist, and my father still works in the design office, even though they've already been warned that there will be downsizing. So that day they decided to visit the dacha too. There were rumors of increased deaths, so they went together. They were always inseparable as a couple. That's how they died together. There was a heavy snowstorm on the road. That ice caused several cars to collide, and a truck crushed my grandfather's new car. That's a sad story. Jill, did you say that not everyone in your family is a one-woman man? If it's no secret, who's breaking out of the general mold? The girl waved her hand, trying to shake off the dust. My older sister spoils the whole picture, but Daddy doesn't like to talk about her. Has he disowned his own daughter? Not exactly, but it's a taboo subject in our family. My sister did something very ugly once, and after she did it, my father had a heart attack. My father raised us alone. My mom died when I was only 6 years old. Where is your sister now? Jill looked at the boy and replied seriously, in America. Are you kidding me? No, I'm serious. Don't you realize that the song about an American guy, which is played from every radio for many modern girls, is a kind of instruction to action? My sister, too, is infected with the idea of marrying an American, and she seems to have succeeded. But Joe, please, let's move on to another subject, I swear. My little sister doesn't deserve to be talked about so much. Just 2 weeks after the memorable encounter at the night bus stop, Jill invited Joe over to her place. No refusal. I want you to meet my dad. He was my best friend and comrade, until you came along. But you can't have too many good friends. Joe was very nervous before the important meeting, but in 5 minutes he felt welcome at his friend's house. Derek himself came out to meet the guest, which left Joe completely confused. But the owner of the large apartment in the high-rise cheerfully remarked, "My daughter is never wrong about people and only invites her friends over, so I just have to pay attention to you. Come on in and make yourself at home." Although this phrase is often used, and sometimes inappropriately, there is a deep meaning behind it. Jill winked at Tony. Now my daddy is going to give you a whole lecture, but while you're talking, we'll set the table. Tonight we're having French chicken and apple charlotte for dessert. Derek reacted enthusiastically to the menu announcement. Gil managed to find chicken somewhere in the stores. The shelves are empty. Even the canned fish is sold out. Dad gave us some kits at the factory yesterday. It's a holiday coming up. Did you forget? The man frowned, realizing he had forgotten. And what do you do? I'm studying. And I also work part-time, if I may say so. What profession have you chosen? Radio electronics engineer. I don't want to disappoint you, but it's unlikely you'll find a job in your specialty right away. Our design bureau is laying people off, but foreigners have taken over the country, and they're allowed to do whatever they want. There was so much desperation in Derek's voice. I don't know if Jill told you or not, but her late grandfather, my father, did a lot for the country. He was given this huge apartment for his great services. Comrade Stalin himself signed the order, and I followed in my father's footsteps and chose a profession too. But now it seems that nobody needs anyone anymore. Where should we, inventors, teachers, and other intellectuals, though? Maybe we should become janitors. Joe took off his rose-colored glasses and immediately noticed that life is not the same as it seemed to him a day ago. They had a long talk with Jill's father. He told him about his partisan grandfather, about his little sister who had passed away. When at last Jill appeared with a tray of tea and cakes, they found a complete understanding. The girl looked at them cheerfully. "I see you two have already found common ground. Well then, let's eat this chicken together and then have tea with Charlotte." Derek looked questioningly at his daughter. "Jill, perhaps we could have a little drink in honor of the holiday?" "Dad, you're not allowed. If you have a little drink, it's like medicine." Igra's family did not drink, but for the sake of respect, the young man agreed to keep the company. He returned to the hostel in an elevated mood. From the excess of feelings, he involuntarily burst out. "What wonderful people." The roommate tore his head off the pillow and, speaking in a sleepy voice, asked Igra, "I met a girl. I was visiting her today. Her father is an extraordinary man, and the girl is a girl too. Such girls only meet once in a lifetime. Looks like you're in love, brother. Despite this important fact, let's go to bed. And don't forget to invite me to the wedding." But things were moving so fast that it was unseemly to talk about the wedding. Jill's father, as well as 36 employees of the department, were out of work. They were all paid a paltry allowance. But on this money, against the backdrop of believing scenes of chronic shortages could not last more than a month. Joe himself was deeply disappointed. Having received a red diploma, he still believed that all doors were open to him. But the reality turned out to be cruel, because the graduate of a prestigious university turned out to be of no use to anyone. Everywhere he applied, he was politely refused. "I'm sorry, but we don't need such specialists at the moment." After visiting about 24 companies that were still afloat, he couldn't stand it. "Tell me, what kind of specialist do you need?" he asked a lady of mature age. She looked at him over her glasses with a performing look, then stared at a piece of paper. "Need handymen, cleaners, movers," she replied. "I see, you may not continue," the guy said. He didn't know where to go. The commandant demanded that he vacate his bunk since he was no longer a student. There was no money for a rented apartment. The only thing that helped was a job as a loader. One day he was invited to the office. The secretary, without raising her head, nodded toward the boss's office and asked, "Are you expected there?" The head of the freight station was a bit terse. "You have been working for us for more than a year and have shown yourself only on the positive side. Don't consider my offer humiliating, but could you work for us as a foreman? I understand that your diploma implies completely different prospects, but as they say, you can't beat the odds. You can think about it, but not for more than a day. You won't believe it, but today a longshoreman is one of the best paid jobs in the world." Joe said, "I don't need 24 hours. I'll take it." That same day in the evening, he had another surprise waiting for him. Derek met him again in the hallway and said, "Jill went to the store. They're having sausage coupons there today. It's a good thing she's not there yet. Let's have a man-to-man talk." Joe was wary. He had expected anything but such an unusual proposition. Derek continued, "Just don't get me wrong. It's hard on everyone today, and it's easier to bear the hardships together, especially since I can see that you and the woman are serious, and I'm not wrong." "Yes, you are, Derek. I've been wanting to ask you to marry your daughter for a long time, but I just don't have a family base at the moment." "That's what I'm saying. Jill tells me you've got a job, though. Foremen aren't just loaders. And you can live with us. What's the point of two people living in a place like this? It's all going to your wife anyway. And about the wedding, it's up to you to decide. We at one time, though we lived not poor, but just signed with a woman mother. She was burning dissertation, and I also on all fronts was strained. After all, a rich wedding doesn't guarantee a happy family life." Joe realized that Derek was saying some very valid things. "Thank you for your advice. Jill and I will definitely discuss this option," he said. The next day they went to the registry office where they were received by a lady with a disgruntled expression on her face. "There's so much going on in the world and they want to get married," she said. "Just because you're in a bad mood doesn't mean you have to ruin it for others," Joe said ironically. The lady with the incredibly bulky hair apologized. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to offend you. Do you want the ceremony or just for fun?" Joe replied that they just needed to sign. A month in, the lady said, "There will be rings for sure." When they officially became husband and wife, Joe set about looking for a well-paying job again. He never showed his red diploma to anyone again. Not a week later, he was offered a position as a security guard. He accepted. The family had money and groceries, which Joe got through acquaintances. But these changes did not please Derek. At first, he was still optimistic and believed that better times would soon come. You just said something stupid. Jill, you're everything to me. You're my universe. Even if things don't work out, it won't affect our relationship. Are you sure about that? I'm sure. How can you joke about something like that? You're a doctor, and you must have heard that somewhere in America they're growing babies in test tubes. How far has science gotten? No, I'm not going to go for that. I'd rather adopt a child from an orphanage. There are a lot of children today. Some cuckoos leave newborns at the door. But I think we should wait. My intuition tells me that we will have a child of our own, so we will do everything we can to achieve this goal. The spouses never quarreled. In summer, they spent their free time at the dacha, and in winter, they went to the movies and theaters. One day, after another cultural event, they found at the door of their apartment a surly dressed woman with a small child. Jill immediately recognized her older sister. Lucy, what brings you here? Why didn't you warn us? Instead of greeting, the guest rudely replied, I'm standing here with a child until almost 3, and where were you? We were at the theater for the opening night. That's great. They go to theaters. Poor relatives have to wait outside the door. By the way, I own part of this apartment too. Joe decided to intervene. Excuse me, are you here for the apartment? Why did you come to see our father off? Derek told us how you almost left him on the street when you secretly wanted to sell this very apartment. She pulled a thin cigarette out of a brightly colored packet. Jill, who's this guy? That's my husband, Joe. Now the situation is clearer. We have a husband who ate too many pears. My American husband kicked me out of the door and he can beat me goodbye. Fortunately, he at least gave me the baby. To make a long story short, I almost ran away from the US. Hey, you relatives, how long are you going to torture me outside the door? Joe looked meaningfully at the cigarette. I'm sorry, but we don't smoke in here. And there's no reason for your child to breathe it. But she picked up her suitcases full of stickers and with a cigarette in her mouth entered the apartment. The child remained on the landing. The guest turned to Jill. What are you standing there with your mouth open? By the way, this is your niece, Monica, and the rules will have to be changed. And I remind you again, for those who haven't realized, that I have a right to this apartment too. And Jill didn't respond to that attack. She took the baby in her arms. Oh my God, she's light as a button. She won't eat anything. I have to force feed her. Well, it'll be easier now that we're in our own apartment. And Aunt Jill will be making treats for her favorite niece. Lucy, by the hostess, began to organize her things in the apartment. I hope you will support me a little while I haven't found a job yet. Jill was clearly discouraged by such impertinent behavior from her sister. But as I recall, you used to have very high expectations, so don't count on me too much. Of course, we'll help you for a while, but I warn you, no parties. My husband and I work and are used to peace and order. My sister sank into a chair. I give my own orders in my own house. That's news, but you may not like to hear this, but before Dad died, he transferred everything to me. The cottage too. You've heard him a lot. But you won't kick me out with the baby, will you? Of course I won't. Make yourself at home. With the arrival of the new tenants, the couple's lives changed dramatically. Joe at every turn encountered his wife's sister. She shamelessly flirted with him, but could not wander quietly around the apartment, slightly undressed. One day Jill admonished her, couldn't you at least cover up your charms? Are you afraid of your man? Well, yes, afraid. I can take him away just like that. And if you don't like my pretty lingerie, you can just not look. Joe felt the atmosphere in the house growing more tense by the day. A month passed another, and she hadn't even tried to find a job. But she organized the changes in the house. One day, coming home, the couple found that their belongings had been moved from the bedroom to the room where their father's office used to be. Gritting their teeth, they put up with Lucy's insolence. But the woman didn't stop there. A few weeks later, a 2-meter imported refrigerator appeared in the kitchen. Jill couldn't help herself. But if I remember correctly, you were complaining about not having enough money. How on earth did you manage to buy this appliance that takes up most of the usable space? Sis, you can imagine, I had no trouble getting a loan. I didn't expect it to be so easy. Jill exclaimed. Let me ask you, who's going to pay for it? Of course I am, but later, when I get a job. But you'll be able to pay the installment in a couple months. After all, the child has nowhere to go. You don't seem to want a child at all. The girl is clearly retarded. She needs to be seen by doctors. Lucy couldn't take it anymore. Did you call Monica inadequate? I didn't say that, but the girl should be able to speak a few words. There's definitely something wrong with her. The sisters argued for a long time. Joe left the apartment quietly for the first time in years. Then he started coming home at night, and sometimes even stayed overnight in the construction trailer at work. Jill began to look at him with suspicion more and more often, but her condition indicated that she was on the verge of a breakdown. When the patience of both spouses was wearing thin, Joe said, "Jill, something has to be done about this. If we don't solve this problem now, your sister will tear us apart." Suddenly, the wife burst into tears. "I knew it. You have another woman. That's why you come home late. And sometimes you're out at night. And my sister had nothing to do with it." Joe caught himself thinking that for the first time he didn't recognize his sweet and affectionate wife. She was a complete stranger, and he felt frightened. The couple grew more and more distant from each other. Sometimes it seemed to Joe that the insufferable Lucy was poisoning his sister. One day Jill said to him, "I should let you know that I've registered Lucy and Monica. It's your living space, and you have the right to do whatever you want with your square footage. But I can't kick out my own sister." Did I ever say that to you? Jill was becoming more and more like her sister. One day he overheard the sisters talking about some guy. It was mostly Lucy. "Jill, you can't imagine what kind of a man he is. He's nothing like yours. He's recently bought a plot of land, and before that he bought a factory up north. Will you be with such a husband as with a piece of cake on horseback? Get rid of the boredom in your heart. What kind of love is love nowadays? That's not what's valued today." Joe could barely contain himself from making a scandal in the house, but he did. But these contradictions in the apartment were not resolved. On the contrary, they only escalated. Jill was at work when Lucy entered their room without knocking. "Are you busy? What do you want?" "I'm just bored. I want to talk." "Go to work. It's the best cure for boredom. Only plebeians can be satisfied with work. I'll have a private life without forced labor. I'll tell you a secret. I'm getting married soon." "Congratulations." But she walked on by, swaying her hips. "By the way, your wife also has a secret admirer. The richest man in the world with $1 billion fortune, in case you didn't know. He recently gave Jill a gorgeous bouquet. It's in the living room." And Joe rudely pushed Lucy out of the way and rushed into the living room. There in a vase was indeed a huge bouquet of their roses. In one motion, the man opened the window and threw the bouquet out. Lucy laughed. "What weak nerves we have." But the climax of the family show was yet to come. Jill was in the kitchen preparing dinner when Lucy suddenly shouted, "Joe, come here quick. Jill isn't feeling well." The woman fainted, and the older sister splashed water on her face. Waking up from her fainting spell, she embarrassedly said to her husband Joe, "Our prayers have been heard by God. We're going to have a baby." The man's mind was reeling with her words. "She cheated on you. This is not your child." But out loud he said, "That's great. We haven't had anything like this in 6 years." All of a sudden we hit the jackpot. "Jill, are you sure it's my baby?" The next second the man felt his left cheek burn from the slap. But she was right. "I was very wrong about you, Joe. I'm asking you to leave. We have nothing more to talk about." It's been almost 25 years, and Joe remembers everything in detail as if it were yesterday. Leaving the home where he'd been happy for so many years with his one and only woman, Joe knew he would never come back here again. And winter came suddenly, bringing a month's supply of snow to the village and the nearby settlement. But Joe was used to walking light. Maybe that's why he caught a cold, and he felt brisk in the morning. But by evening he was down with a fever. Even though it was Friday on the calendar, he didn't believe May would dare come to him in this weather. The man regretted for the first time that he had refused to buy a cell phone. It would have been easier. This way I'll die and no one will know. If I recover, I swear I'll buy a cell phone. He was either delirious or feverishly oblivious. It was almost dark outside when familiar footsteps were heard on the porch. May came. As she walked through the woods, May looked like a snowman. She said hello cheerfully, not noticing her master's condition. Oh, Joe, you're covered in snow. I don't know how I got here. I'm all wet. The woman carefully placed her boots near the stove. Why didn't you heat the stove today? So that the stoves wouldn't freeze by morning. It's so cold. Why are you in bed? Are you ill? The woman came closer and touched Joe's forehead. Oh, you have a fever. Oh my God, it's a good thing I got here in time. Someone whispered to me to come. Just bear with me a little longer. I'll do some magic and make you some honey tea. Your doctor really is the miracle worker. The woman bustled about the house and Joe watched her. The house became warm, and after the tea the man felt relief. His eyes began to close on their own. He was almost falling asleep. There was a faint knock at the door. May crossed herself. Who had come on such a quiet night? She looked out the window, but saw only dark silhouettes. Joe, who's come to see you in this bad weather? I'll go and see. A minute later, the woman returned and a young woman with a baby in her arms entered the house. Joe, greeting the visitors, that it was his daughter. The man forgot his condition. Whose daughter? You must be joking with a sick man. I've been a recluse in the community for 20 years. The guest took off the shawl in which he was wrapped, and Joe almost fainted. Standing before him was his beloved wife. His wife. She hadn't changed at all. She was in her early 20s. He realized that couldn't be true. Most likely all these visions were caused by fever. But just in case, he asked, "Wife?" The girl smiled in surprise. "My God, have I really found you? Don't worry, I'll take care of you here and no one will hurt us." Joe and May looked at the woman with surprised eyes. She helped the child take off her coat and leaned over. "My name is Christy. I'm your daughter. Mom said you might not believe me right away, but we had no other choice. We had to find you. I've been on the road for almost 2 days." May didn't let her finish. "We'll talk about all this later. For now, let's sit down at the table and eat ourselves, and the baby needs to be fed." Joe got up too. The temperature wasn't as important as Christy and Ruth right now. Everything that had taken so many years to accomplish was taking his soul. Somewhere inside it began to hurt again. May quickly poured the soup, put the bread down. There was no sour cream. She didn't know what to give the child, but Christy smiled. "Thank you, Ruth is doing well. She's eating everything." While she wasn't feeding Ruth, the young mother didn't even put a crumb in her mouth. She looked at the girl almost immediately. And May was sharing the couch. No matter what the arrangement, you can't go anywhere in this weather with a baby. Christy carried Ruth over to the bed, kissed her, and looked at the car. "Thank you." She went back to the table and looked straight into Joe's eyes. He even perked up at that look. "I don't even know where to begin." Joe coughed. "You, starting at the beginning, I guess your mom must have told you everything. From the moment we broke up." "All right, let's start there. That's even better. Of course, I only know about that time from my mom and my aunt." "But she still lives with her?" Christy nodded. "Yes. And that's why I'm here." She seemed to catch her breath. "Then when you left, but she wasn't too happy. Mom seems to have woken up. She says the slamming of the door sobered her up. Mom wanted to run after you, but she wouldn't let her. She held Mom and yelled at her not to be silly. When Mom calmed down a bit, she started calling people she knew to arrange for an abortion. Mom yelled that she would never do it in her life, but she replied that then she would be the biggest fool of all. The man she had chosen for Mom needed no affection. Anyway, they had a big fight, even fought. Well, that's according to Mom. But the next day, she moved in with her man. Some man about 20 years older than Lucy, but well-to-do. She didn't hesitate to leave Monica to her mom, even though Lucy wasn't working. And Mom had to go to work, but Mommy decided that the baby would be better off with her than with Lucy. Then I was born, and Mommy raised us both. Mom took Monica to doctors. She spent the last of her money on her treatment. And soon Monica started talking and calling my mom Mommy. And then, it was probably about 6 or 7 years ago, Lucy came back to us. Try as she might, years of bad habits had taken their toll, and her so-called husband had found someone younger. He had nothing but a pile of clothes. She argued for a long time, screaming, how could he do such a thing? Mom did not hesitate to take away her legal square meters. And then Mom made a terrible mistake, which she regretted for a long time. She gave Lucy a share so she wouldn't ruin her life. And then what happened? Well, she brought some men over, threw some parties. By the time I was 13 and Monica was 18, they were out with Mom. All this time, Mom seemed quieter and quieter. She seemed to be buckling under the weight of guilt. That's what you told me about you. I didn't try to look for you, thinking that if you wanted to, you'd find us on your own. Then I met Jack, and I didn't have time for you. Especially since Lucy had been committed to a psychiatric hospital, from which she would probably never be released. But as it turned out, our troubles were just beginning, and we didn't even know it. Monica disappeared right after her mother was admitted to the hospital. We were shocked. Almost a year later, she reappeared. As you can imagine, she demanded square footage. Mom immediately said that nothing would happen because the square meters are allocated, but we'll have to wait until Mom dies. And I need the money now. Monica, can't you understand that? You say you need square footage, and then you say you need money? Make up your mind. Monica smirked. Why are you so stupid, Auntie? Square meters can easily be turned into money. I have some gypsies who are interested in them. You can also receive guests from neighboring countries. They, need more than just registration. And they offer quite a lot of money because we all realize that as soon as they settled here, you will immediately sell your apartment for a pittance. And to get a place like this for a pittance, is worth a lot. Jill clutched at her heart. How can you shamelessly say those things to me? I treated you. If it weren't for me, you wouldn't have learned to talk. Monica only laughed. Well, even though I wasn't born here, I know that you can't do good without getting evil in return. And I don't forgive you. I'll see what I can do. And Monica disappeared. Honestly, ashamed as I am to say it, everyone was hoping she was hit by a car or died of drunkenness. But no. Monica, it turns out, took a loan from some dubious company and went to America, hoping that Dad would support her morally and financially. Everything calmed down. I'd introduced my mom to Jack. He turned out to be wonderful. We didn't have a big wedding. I was already pregnant, and I was sick of everything. We got married and went to Turkey as a family of 3. And when we came back, we'd all lived together in an apartment. You can see how much space there is. Mom was working, Jack was working. I was already on maternity leave. We started to forget about Monica and Lucy. When Ruth was 3, we got a call from the hospital saying Lucy had died. Mom cried, of course. We gave her a proper burial. Only, apparently, it wasn't just us, it was Monica. And 2 months before the inheritance, she came back. She came in like a landlady and told us straight away that she was going to take the apartment away from us. She brought a few people with her. It so happened that Jack couldn't resist and broke one of them's nose. Monica quickly called the police. My husband's lawyer was investigated, and my mom ended up in the hospital. Ruth and I were left alone in the apartment, but not for long. Monica came with the police and some papers saying that her mother owned the square meters in the apartment, and not only was she staying with us, but a bunch of other strangers. We couldn't stay there. There were constant parties. I was in a panic. I just didn't know what to do. My husband's in jail. My mom's dying in the hospital. She told me to find you to tell you everything. She said that you're good and you'll definitely help. There was silence in the room. Joe was silent too. May only occasionally helped him with her nose. Finally, Joe stood up. Well, Christy, you're going to bed now. I can see you're very tired. Do you still have time to make your inheritance? Yes, almost a month. Not long enough. But okay, we'll try to make it. May walked Christina to her bed. If you need anything, feel free to ask. Thank you. Right now, I have one wish. I really want to lie down and sleep. But rest and don't hesitate. Joe, if he says he'll help, he'll help. You know he knows some powerful people, don't you? He's got a lot of big shots behind him. There was a case. May wanted to tell a very interesting story about how Joe saved some big bots from death. But Christy was already asleep, cradling her daughter in her arms. The woman sighed, crossed herself discreetly, and stepped out from behind the curtain. Joe was sitting at his desk, leafing through some notebook. May, do you have your cell phone with you? Yeah, of course I do. What am I supposed to do? You can't go anywhere without a phone these days. Joe smiled. May wanted to scold him again for still not having the phone, but I waved my hand. Joe never listened to anyone's opinion. You may go to bed too. The weather's such that I won't let you go home with your choice of any room. And I need to make a phone call to talk. May nodded. She wasn't going home herself anyway as she listened to Christy's story. It was completely dark outside, and the blizzard was already brewing, but there was plenty of food. In such bad weather, he didn't argue with her and didn't go outside. The next day a man came to them. They had breakfast. May got out early, set the table, made porridge. Ruth was such a sweet and cheerful girl that Joe's house seemed to come alive. She was cheerfully counting something, talking about her mother, and her mother looked anxiously at her guest, who was pleased to be supported. "But I'm going to go. I've got a cat there alone." Joe turned to her. "May, don't forget about me." "No, what are you going to do without me at home?" "I'll cook the cat, feed the stove, and come back." "Thank you." The women were embarrassed, and Joe turned away quickly. Somehow he felt ashamed in front of them, as if he had lied somewhere. But he hadn't, and he couldn't have, of course. The path through the woods was familiar, and one didn't even have to look down. May walked on and pondered. Turns out Joe wasn't lonely at all. Now that his daughter had arrived, they would obviously communicate, and probably there would be no need for her visits at all. It was kind of sad, hurt, even a little. And then I calmed down. I'm not at that age to be jealous or worried. One should be happy that a good person's life will turn for the better. She talked herself into it and calmed down. She tried to shift her focus to the cat, who had apparently lost his mind. How was that possible? The mistress of the night was not at home. "Look at me," Joe said casually. "What were you doing there all night? Did Joe pick you up?" May jumped in surprise, then spat angrily. "Lily, you're going to give me a heart attack someday." Lily stood in front of her, blocking the way. Her eyes were just huge. "That's an answer. That's not leaving. You spent the night at Joe's." "And I don't have to answer you." "Where did I sleep over?" "None of your business. You keep talking, I'll tell Tony. He'll put you in your place in no time." May overtook her stunned neighbor and walked toward the house. Lily remained standing, digesting the information she had received. Then she sprang into action. "I have to tell Kira everything." She'd had her eye on Joe for a long time. Yes, she was preparing the ground, but after running for a while, she stopped. In case she told Tony the truth, the women looked at him with interest, but they all knew. He's a serious man. If something is wrong, he can get angry. There was a time when there was a fight. Men from a neighboring village decided to come, and not two, not three, but four. It took Joe a day to catch them and get them out of the woods. The militia had them tied up. The men wouldn't say anything. How could he have handled them on his own? But judging by the bruises and abrasions on their faces, they didn't allow themselves to be tied up quite voluntarily. After a bit of thinking, deciding that her own life and peace was more important, Lily turned around and therefore went to her house, thinking over a plan of revenge against May. The man asked Christy many questions, wrote something down, noted something. She was in so much agony that she almost collapsed on the couch when he finally said goodbye. Joe looked at her sympathetically. "Christy, would you mind going outside with Ruth? The sun is shining, the snow is sparkling, the air is thick, the baby's breathing." Half an hour later, Ruth was already squealing happily, running with the dog in the yard. Joe and Christy were sitting on a bench. "Maybe I should apologize to you." Christy put his hand on his shoulder. "No, you shouldn't. You think Mom told it like she saw it, but she didn't. She was telling the truth, and how you made her go to work, and how she walked in front of you, and how much she wanted you two to break up. Mom always thought it was her fault. She would never tell me everything and ask me to find you. You know what I told her when she sent me here? I told her that anything could have happened to you over the years. You could have been married 5 times, you could have drank, you could have died, you could have ended up dead. But she smiled and said it just couldn't happen." Joe smiled sadly. "You know, there's not much good in me. I shouldn't have acted like that. I should have taken matters into my own hands. I'm just sick of seeing it all. I didn't act like a man." "Tell me, who was that? A lawyer?" Joe smiled. "Not exactly. You see, if you start a lawsuit, you could lose. Even if you win, it won't last a month, that's for sure. He was some kind of gangster, an ex-authority. But you realize there are no exes." Christy blushed. "My God, why is all this happening to us? Does it ever happen?" "Nothing. We're all together now. We'll get through this. We'll totally get through this." 2 more days passed. Christy took over most of the housework, and May felt unwanted. "But I probably won't come tomorrow. Christy is doing fine on her own. I'll take care of things at home." She walked away. Christy looked at Joe. "Why did you say anything to her?" She was waiting for some words. Joe didn't know what to say, so he just said, You figure it out for yourself. He and I are good friends. I thought it really wasn't a very nice thing to do. That evening someone called. Joe only handed the phone to Chris's husband. Chris tried to understand what it was about, but her father only answered in short sentences. Yes, no, okay. She was just exhausted from the feeling of uncertainty. Finally, Joe handed her the phone. Christy, it's for you, he said, preparing to answer more questions. But then she heard it. My dear, how are you? Jack? Jack. She almost lost her mind. Jack, where are you? How can you talk? Yeah. Kyle somehow managed to get me out. I'm on my way to you. Christy, listen to me carefully. You need to be in town. Mom can't handle things right now, so it's going to be up to you. How's your father doing? I understand he's taken you in. Yes, Jack, yes. All is well. You've been with your mom. She's not allowed to use the phone. Yes, I was still heavy, but the doctors say there are signs of improvement. That's what I was gonna say. Monica has been causing a lot of trouble here, and we decided that Rita would have to stay there for a while. How's your father doing? I'm not going without her. How could I explain that to you? It could be dangerous here. Even for us, she's completely defenseless. It's so bad. Yes and no. We'll get the apartment back. Monica has no choice. She needs the money badly. She's under pressure from creditors on all sides. We just didn't know. She hasn't lived in America in over 2 years. Now she has bills to pay. It would be one thing if they were government banks, but she managed not to borrow money from people who don't forgive. Okay, I'll talk to my father. I look forward to meeting you. We're looking forward to it. Joe had a rough idea of what it was all about. Do you need to keep Ruth? Christy sighed. Jack says I do, but I don't see how to do it. I've never been separated from her. Joe smiled as he looked at his granddaughter playing. He and the dog had never been separated either. For the first few hours, the dog looked at Ruth like he was going crazy. He had never seen such small and active children in his life. His master always held himself with dignity. Every step he took spoke to him slowly. And the other people they met all looked alike. They all had the same smell of stoves in old age. And here was something completely different. A small man, hardly taller than a dog, was always talking, laughing, trying to pet the dog. He even looked away. And here was this strange creature. She cheered, clapping her hands. No, it didn't mind being stroked. It was just a little scary. What could you expect from such a strange little man? But then the dog saw that the little man had been fed and put to bed. Then he decided to take a closer look at this miracle. He started from afar. From time to time he looked at his master, but everyone at the table was busy talking. Then the little man moved closer. There was no danger in his scent, more like some kind of vulnerability. Suddenly the dog felt a little sad, and then he realized that this man was just as much a little puppy, and therefore needed to be protected and guarded. As soon as the dog realized this, he licked Ruth's cheek affectionately and lay down in front of the bed so that no one could pass. And of course, no stranger had come near Ruth since then. Christy even smiled. Look at what a protector my daughter has. Then she turned to Tony. Won't he hurt her? Well, what if she hits him or pinches him? She's just a kid, isn't she? No, don't worry. Sometimes I think a dog is smarter than most people. They went out in the evening. Jack said they'd move in by evening, and they had to leave in the morning. The dog hurt the car first. He was lying in the snow and Ruth was burying him in the snow. The dog jumped up, shaking off the snow. Ruth laughed because most of the snow fell on her. The dog froze. Dog, come here. I looked at Jack carefully and walked close to Rita. Jack smiled. Well, okay, so be it. A car appeared. After a few minutes, Ruth looked up too, looked at her mom in surprise and said, Daddy's coming. Krusty barely had time to pick the baby up before she ran out into the road. Killy and Jack got out of the car. Christy and Ruth immediately rushed over to him. He hugged them both at once. He tilted his head somewhere between them and stood like that. Kyle walked over to Tony. Yeah, I've lived my whole life alone. No, there have been some, but never a family. And now I look at you, Joe, and I realize I want a little of what you got now too. Joe smiled. Kyle, I've known you a long time. You have no shortage of weak women. How old are you? 50. So what's the problem then? No, I can't do that. But that's what you're saying. Who needs me now? They didn't have time to finish their conversation. Some young men came up to them. "Let me introduce you. This is my husband, Jack." Jack liked his open eyes and firm handshake. "What are you so worried about? We don't have anyone here. The dog and I will take care of Rita. Everything will be fine. I'll call May. She knows exactly how to handle kids." The thing is, Monica's been in a lot of trouble. She realizes it's not going to be as easy as she thought, and now she can do anything. "Are you worried about Ruth? Stop worrying. Monica won't find her here. She can't be that smart. She was, well, not exactly normal as a child." Jack sighed. "That's what scares me. People like her can be very sneaky when they need to be." In the morning, when Ruth was still asleep, they all left. A couple hours later, while Joe and Ruth were having breakfast, May came in. "Oh, where's Christy?" "Our mommy went with Daddy on an errand and is bringing a beautiful doll." Ruth agreed, nodded, and opened her mouth, which was immediately filled with a spoonful of the porridge Christy had made that morning. May smiled. "Oh, hockey, the match was great." It was as if she always fed the kids from a spoon. "But we're resourceful people, so we'll manage." 2 days passed. Jack and Christy called every night. Christy left the phone with her father. Monica was gone, and even Kyle's men couldn't find her. And before that, she tried to attack Jill, planning to go into her room. "Anyway, we're going to your place tonight. Maybe I should stick around town. After all, there's people there, police and all." "All right, Jack, I'll be waiting for you." As soon as he hung up, she heard a noise in the woods. What the hell was that? Joe immediately transformed. He's the master of his woods. It wasn't hunting season, and a stranger shooting at animals was a serious emergency. The noise wasn't very far away, maybe a kilometer away. But given the cold, maybe a little farther, he ran home. "Will you keep an eye on May here? All hunting is forbidden now." "Oh, how long will you be, Joe? I feel like my heart's out of place." "No, it's around here somewhere. You're in too much of a hurry. The dog's with me." In 2 jumps, I felt a real jaw and was beside him. A few more minutes and they disappeared behind the trees. Lily really wanted to know what was going on at Joe's. May hardly ever goes out there and only shows up to feed the cat and turn down the stove. And before that, she'd seen a car there. And it seemed to her that he had even driven past May at night, asking in vain, which meant she would have to drive herself. Having chosen a good day, she walked briskly toward the forest. But had the forest been bought? Can anyone pass through here? But that was in case she met someone. Otherwise, she would only catch a glimpse and go straight home. She couldn't resist telling Kira, and she was completely confused. "Oh, May. Oh, did you want a piece of the bad man for yourself?" "No, I need to find out what's going on in there. I don't believe Joe has fallen for her." Lily smiled. "And how did you know if you was talkative?" Kira brought her face closer to Lily's face. "Here you are going to find out. Otherwise, I'll tell May that you told everyone you were sleeping with Joe." Lily was taken aback by such insolence. There are still people here who will condemn not only May, but those who spread gossip about her. "But you're no better, Kira." "Who are you?" "You're no saint either. As soon as you find out, come right over." Lily had no choice but to come up with a plan and head towards the forest. Luckily, no one noticed her. Lily's eyes widened when she saw a little girl playing in the yard. May was sitting with Joe, talking about something. Lily quickly turned back before she was noticed, but that only brought up more questions and no answers. She told Kira everything, and the latter went home with a sense of accomplishment. However, she couldn't understand why the recluse had a child with her. It gave her a headache. No sooner had she reached home than a car stopped beside her. Lily turned around in surprise. The car was unfamiliar. She knew all the cars that came to the village. There weren't that many of them. Behind the wheel sat an elegant young woman. "Hello. And to you, local resident," she said, taking off her sunglasses. "Do you have to wear sunglasses in winter?" "Local. Could you help me, please?" The woman smiled. Lily was surprised. Usually, when a person smiled, their eyes smiled too. But this woman's eyes remained unchanged. "Sure, why not help? If it's within my power. You see, my ex-husband took my little girl away from me. I know for a fact that he hid her somewhere in these parts, but I have no idea where. I don't want to involve the police. He's just very worried, but the child should be with her mother." "That's right." And that's what the court said too. Lily was stunned. She wanted to tell her story right away. There it was. That's it. The decision. But Joe, this is unbelievable. A seemingly decent man, and he's still hiding the child. I know. And I'm telling you, I know. I was out for a walk the other day, and I came upon a ranger's cabin. What's a woodsman's cabin? Well, it's Joe's house in the woods. Well, our Joe lives there. He's all alone, like a hermit. He hasn't had any relatives for a long time, but I saw a little girl in his yard. How do I get to that cabin? Show me. I could tell the woman was troubled. It was unpleasant. Maybe it's just her demeanor though. Not everyone has to like Lily. Even Lily doesn't like her. What's wrong with that? I'll show you. Just go down this road, and then into the woods. It won't get lost there. It'll just be a little farther away. Just go straight ahead. Don't turn anywhere. Why am I talking about turning? You don't have to turn anywhere. Just go straight to the cabin and you'll see for yourself. Thank you. The woman got into her car and drove toward the woods. Lily stood for a moment, then turned around too. No, Kira needed to know all this, not to offend Lily, but to marvel at her knowledge. Kira listened to Lily and sighed. It's all so strange, but I can't believe Joe would hide someone who shouldn't be hidden. Besides, you saw the father who supposedly brought the child. It's logical to assume that if he took her, he loves her very much and should be with her all the time. But I'm not being picky. Maybe he just went to the bathroom at that point. You're not Sherlock Holmes either. But it's entirely possible that he just stepped out for a minute. Anyway, that explains why May's there. Apparently they just asked for help. What could two men possibly know about how to woo a girl? Lily slapped herself on the forehead. She's right, after all. How could I not have thought of that? But why should she tell her that she would complain to Tony? Kyra laughed. What's the big deal? Do you want to be left alone? You're worse than that sheet. You won't stick to anything. Lily pouted. Come on, no offense. How can we find out more about what's going on over there? It's boring out here. Let's just go for a walk. Come on, I'll wait for you at home, Sneaky. You like to meddle in other people's business. Lily grumbled, but quickly took the money and headed towards Joe's cabin. It won't take long. I've been there so many times. No, I'll leave this as a tip for your services. She walked slowly. Just as she reached the edge of the woods, she heard a noise. Not far away, but not toward the gamekeeper's lodge. The sound was like gunshots, but it was quiet after that. Maybe it was the animals being spooked. She shrugged her shoulders and continued on her way. It wasn't much further to the lodge. Only about 300 to 400 meters left when Lily saw the car. She thought it was strange. It was a good road. Why didn't that lady drive all the way to the lodge? Lily stopped again. A bad feeling crept into her soul. She took a step. Her legs became weak. What is this? Joe had found the place he was looking for. No blood, no repeat shots. That's not how poachers behave. Then who did and why? The dog was very agitated. He kept jumping and looking around. Who could have influenced him? Only someone who wanted to lure me out of the house. The dog. As if on command, the dog rushed forward. With great leaps it ran backward. Joe skied after her as fast as he could. God, no, I hope I'm wrong. He felt like he was suffocating. A little farther and a little farther, and the roof was already in sight. May was just setting the table when the door opened. She thought it was Joe and turned around with a smile. But there was a strange woman standing on the threshold, looking at Ruth. The girl, seeing her, took a chance and hid behind May's skirt. All at once things became more serious. Who are you? What do you want? I've come for my niece. We need to live together for a while until her parents and her grandmother come to their senses. I'm not giving you the girl, and leave my house. Monica laughed. What a silly woman. But what can you expect from village people? They're all like that. She moved toward Money and Rita, even held out her hands, but Mai grabbed the poker. Just come any closer, and I'll send you straight to hell. Monica smiled. What an idiot. Why are you fighting over someone else's child? Life has gotten boring, and I could have lived a little longer. Monica reached into his pocket and pulled out a gun. Come here. Grandma is going to die soon. Ruth started to cry. May prepared to close her eyes, but Monica suddenly collapsed and collapsed. Lily stood behind her with a surprised look, holding an iron poker. "Hello." May slowly sat down on the chair. "Lily, if you only knew how happy I am to see you for the first time in my life." Lily looked at Monica lying on the floor. "We should tie her up. And when she wakes up, we need to get her into the house." The dog rushed into the house with a growl. He barked several times, causing the dishes to clink. Then he rushed to Rita. The girl hugged the dog and pressed herself against him. The dog seemed to push her to the far corner of the room. May stood up resolutely. "I'll find the rope now." She headed for the door, but was almost knocked down. "Joe, are you alive?" He could barely speak. And then he saw Monica on the floor. "Damn it, I found her. We gotta tie her up. And we need to get our men." May felt, rather than heard, some movement. She turned sharply. Monica woke up and took aim at Joe's back. May stepped forward, dropped under Joe's feet, and swung. And with the same poker struck Monica. Then she dropped her and ran at May. May, oh, what have I done?" May opened her eyes. "What did you call me?" "Don't die. Who am I going to argue with? Can you hear me? Don't you dare." May's eyes slowly closed in the corner of the room. Ruth was crying loudly. Monica showed no signs of life. May was turning pale before her eyes. Joe ran from May to Rita, then back to Masha, finally grabbing the phone. "An ambulance. Hello." At that moment, Jack burst into the house, followed by Christy, who immediately rushed in after her. "How are you doing with Lily?" Joe slowly sat down. "She had my back with her." The car sped down the snow-covered road at top speed. Jack was looking ahead. The ambulance and the police were coming towards them. Finally, he saw them. He started to slow down. At the same time, the car honked behind them, and Lily cried softly, holding her friend's head in May's lap. It was sunny outside. The sun was still shining in places, but the yard was easy enough to run and jump and have fun. And what, in fact, Ruth and the dog were doing. "Ruth, well, you're going to knock Mommy off her feet." Christy, holding large platters of sandwiches. Skillfully, she dodged her daughter. Ruth laughed, hugged the dog, and almost hung onto him. Christy scolded the dog. "Well, she's small, but you have to realize that you can't behave like that." The dog looked guiltily at Christy and tried to walk away. He didn't succeed, however, because Ruth was still hanging around his neck. As soon as Christy turned away, the dog jumped up and Ruth slapped him on the heel. The girl immediately pressed her lips together to hold back her tears, but the dog licked her nose again, and the girl forgot about the offense. She laughed again and ran away from the dog. Christy shook her head. "Daddy, why are you laughing? Everyone will be here soon. And you're still in your gym clothes." Joe looked confused. "I don't know, Christy. I'm getting nervous for some reason." "Well, you're something else. You're not 17 anymore." 17? Not 17. I'm scared. What if it fails? Who's going to fail? May, please. Do you want me to tell you something in confidence? Jack looked at his daughter carefully. "I do, but you can't tell secrets. This one is. You're not gonna tell anyone anyway. And soon everyone will know." Christy paused meaningfully. Kyle consulted Jack. "What flowers does Mom like best?" And he also asked which ring would be best. He finally gave up. "And thank you for telling me. For some reason, I feel guilty about Jill. No matter how I feel about it, I left her. Put her in that situation." "Oh, Daddy." Christy came over and gave him a hug. I look at Mom now and realize I've never seen her so happy. Neither age nor all her illnesses matter. It doesn't matter when a person has such a sparkle in their eyes. So please don't worry." The dog barked and ran out of the yard. Christy picked Ruth up in her arms, but she quickly moved into her grandfather's arms. It was safer there, and they had just passed 2 cars at the gate. Jack was driving one of them. The car was shiny. It looked brand new. Jack got out of the car. "So, father-in-law, buddy, how do you like this car?" "It's like nothing I ever dreamed of." "All that money, a car like this." Joe smiled. He was truly happy to give his daughter and son-in-law such a gift. They had become his dearest and most beloved. What good is money if he just saves it up? He doesn't want to buy anything. Besides, another thought flashed in his mind. If he has a son-in-law, a daughter, and a granddaughter, what will they drive? So maybe they will visit more often and bring his granddaughter to him. Since there would be a granddaughter in the car should be nice and reliable. Jack opened the door. "Welcome, heroine." May laughed and got out of the car. While she had been in the hospital, she had lost a lot of weight and even seemed younger. Joe looked at her and didn't recognize her. "Hello, May." "Hello, Joe." Unable to bear it, he rushed to her, embraced her, and pressed her against him. May was surprised at first, but then she clung to him and hugged him back. At that moment, Kylie and Jill came out of the second car. Joe had only seen her once before at the hospital. The meeting was kind of awkward and rushed. There were a lot of people. They couldn't talk enough. Just as he was about to leave, she took his hand. "Don't hold it against me, Joe. I know I acted stupidly, and I don't hold anything against you. Thank you for your help." He put his hand on hers. "What kind of thanks? These are my relatives." He looked at her now and realized that Christy was absolutely right. Jill was happy. Kyle was too. Joe couldn't help himself. "You're glowing like a nickel. Did you win a prize or something?" Kyle laughed. "You could say that. The best woman in the world has agreed to be my wife." Jill blushed as the man pulled her to him, and Joe turned to May. "May, while we're at it, you know I'm not one to talk pretty. Anyway, here." He held out a small box to her. "What's this?" "You open it." May carefully opened the box. There was a gold ring. "May, marry me and bring your cat. Bring your dog to be friends with." An hour later, everyone was sitting outside at a table. The noise, the smell of kebabs. Jack suddenly said, "This doesn't look good." Joe looked at him and asked, "What do you mean?" "You could have called Lily. She was in on the whole thing too." Lily said, "You don't have to call me. I'll come myself. The whole village smells of your kebabs." Lily stood in the gate. Jack jumped up and took her under his arm. "Excuse us, Aunt Lily." Lily said, "Come on, people. They don't notice anything around them when they're happy. I forgive you." 6 months passed. It was very early in the morning, but Joe was already doing something in the yard. He said to May, "Jack and Christy and Ruth are coming today on vacation." May had to make her best pies. She took on the dough, the meat, and all the chuckles. The dog lay beside the couch and diligently pretended to be sound asleep. On the couch sat the cat, looked at the dog with a predatory look, and waved his tail, trying to make sure that the tail necessarily came to the nose of the dog. We realized that the dog was holding on with his last strength, but we also knew that the cat had a very bad temper. Finally, the dog couldn't stand it and quietly licked the cat's tail with his teeth. He bit it and immediately let it out, but the cat squealed as if he'd been run over 4 times by a car. A terrified Joe came running in and asked, "What happened?" He looked at May laughing, at the cat, who was swinging on the curtain and was bloated to the size of a big fox, and then looked at the dog, who was pretending to be asleep even more. May just waved her hand and said, "It's nothing, it's fine. The cat is just testing his fate. He'll wait for the dog to serve him." The offended cat calmly jumped down from the curtain and headed for the door. As he passed the dog, he swished his tail across his nose, and the dog suddenly sneezed. The cat jumped on Joe with fright. Now Joe was laughing with May. The car stopped in the yard. "Oh, ours are here," May exclaimed. Joe jumped out first, followed by May. They paid no attention to the fact that their hands were up to their elbows in dough. When the children arrived, the evening promised to be pleasant.
Thank you for watching this video to the end. Subscribe to the channel. Like it, write comments if you like the story, and see you on the channel.